At my younger sister's Ivy League graduation, she laughed while raising a glass. Maggie still waits tables at 40. I guess ambition skipped a generation. Our father chimed in, toasting, "One daughter made it, that's enough." Laughter rippled through the room, echoing off chandeliers and polished silver. I smiled politely, knowing none of them realised who had quietly funded her entire education, or who had saved the very university they were standing in. Tomorrow, when the dean steps up to the podium, the truth will crack the glass castle they've built, and I won't even need to speak a single word. The university parking lot shimmered with freshly waxed luxury cars and the scent of expensive cologne. I pulled in behind a matte black Tesla, my rusted Honda Civic coughing gently as I shifted it into park. The graduation banners fluttered above the main entrance, their gold and navy colours proudly announcing the moment my sister, Chloe Lowell, would be honoured as one of the year's top MBA graduates. I watched as polished shoes and designer heels clicked across the pavement, the people above them draped in silk, linen and pride. I adjusted the sleeves of my department store dress, second-hand but clean, and grabbed a modest gift bag from the passenger seat. Inside was a silver pen engraved with her initials. It had taken 2 weeks of extra shifts, late-night closings, and my tips in coins and crumpled bills to afford it. The pen wasn't expensive by any standard in this crowd, but it was a token of the love I still carried for my little sister, buried beneath layers of disappointment and distance. I walked slowly towards the building, careful not to trip on the uneven pavement in my worn-out flats. I passed families taking selfies, a woman wearing a dress that probably cost more than my rent, and a young man checking his Rolex every few seconds. I didn't belong here, and every glint of jewellery, every spray of designer perfume made that painfully clear. Inside, the auditorium buzzed with anticipation. I found a seat in the second row, deliberately not the front. I didn't want to draw attention. I looked around at the proud faces, fathers adjusting ties, mothers clutching tissues, siblings chatting and laughing. No one looked like me. My place was behind a counter, not in an auditorium built for applause. I felt my father's presence before I saw him. Mr. Lowell arrived 10 minutes late, as always, wearing a suit that smelled like expensive aftershave and expectation. He glanced around, his eyes grazing over me like I was a stranger in the crowd. When he finally acknowledged me, it was with a nod so shallow it could have been directed at a waiter. "Didn't think you'd make it," he said, adjusting his cufflinks without looking at me. "I requested the day off weeks ago," I replied softly, keeping my tone even. He grunted in response, his attention already drifting to his phone. The empty seat between us felt like a reminder of the distance he'd placed, the wall he'd helped build between me and the family I once belonged to. I remembered Chloe's high school graduation, how he'd waved and cheered, how he saved a seat for me. That was before I dropped out of college to care for our sick mother, while Chloe went on to chase dreams I left behind. The music began and the graduates filed in. Chloe walked with confidence, her blonde hair styled into perfect waves, her smile glowing. She looked radiant in her gown, the kind of poised success story people love to post about. She spotted me almost instantly. Her eyes flickered with something unreadable, and then, there it was, that smile. A tight, knowing smirk, one that said, "You still don't belong here." She turned to the girl beside her and whispered something. They both laughed, quick and quiet, like teenagers mocking someone from across the cafeteria. My cheeks flushed, but I didn't flinch. I had learned long ago that reacting only gave her more power. I looked down at the gift bag in my lap. The silver pen suddenly felt like a cruel joke. 2 weeks of working myself raw so I could present a token of pride at a ceremony where I was clearly unwelcome. My father leaned forward, craning for a better photo angle, his phone already recording. "That's my girl," he said to the woman in front of him. His voice carried, loud, full of pride, the kind he hadn't offered me in years. As the dean welcomed the audience, my chest tightened. I was invisible here, not just socially, but genetically, apparently. The successful genes had skipped me, or so they believed, but they didn't know the truth. Not yet. They didn't know who had quietly ensured Chloe's future. and for now I was content to sit in the shadows, but not for much longer. As the names of the graduates were read, Chloe leaned in towards the classmate next to her, some polished girl with flawless skin and a designer scarf peeking from beneath her gown. Chloe whispered something into the girl's ear, loud enough for their small circle to hear, but quiet enough to avoid reprimand. Their laughter followed, brief and bitter, eyes flickering in my direction. It didn't take a genius to know who the punchline was. I sat perfectly still, not because I wasn't angry, but because I'd trained myself to be silent. Their words were knives, yes, but I'd learned to dull the blade. When you've been the family embarrassment long enough, the sting loses its sharpness and becomes a familiar ache. My mind wandered, not away but back, to 19 years old, standing outside the registrar's office with my acceptance letter in hand. I'd gotten into a reputable university with a partial scholarship and dreams stitched into every breath I took. But the moment Mum got her diagnosis, it was over. Dad looked at me that night and said, "You're the oldest, do what's right." And just like that, Chloe's college fund remained intact, while mine was quietly buried beneath unpaid hospital bills and medication schedules. For the next 3 years, I watched Mum fade away and Chloe flourish. While I was learning to mix morphine doses and soothe panic attacks, Chloe was sending home photos from Europe, posing on cobblestone streets with cocktails and confidence. I never resented the sacrifice. I made it with open eyes, but they forgot. They forgot what it cost me. The dean's voice droned on as more names were called, but I wasn't listening. My eyes were locked on Chloe. She wasn't the same little sister who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who used to cry when I left for sleepovers without her. No, this Chloe was rehearsed, polished, and sharper than ever. Every step she took was calculated, and I knew her smirk had been planned. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had been in that admissions room. Not as a proud sister, but as a board member of the Scholarship Foundation she'd unknowingly begged for help. I was the anonymous signature on the approval form, the name on the dotted line of the grant dispersal letter. I had read her application. I had seen her embellished essay about overcoming adversity with the support of a hard-working, selfless family. I had laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was a performance, just like everything else she did. I approved her scholarship anyway, not out of guilt or obligation, but curiosity. I wanted to see what she would become if given every advantage she claimed to have earned. I wanted to know if she'd ever acknowledge the hands that lifted her. She never did. Today, as she stood proudly accepting her diploma, she still hadn't said thank you, not to me, not to the foundation, not to anyone but herself. The dean called her name, Chloe Marie Lowell. A thunder of applause followed as she walked across the stage like it had been built just for her. Our father stood, clapping with the enthusiasm of a man watching his investment mature. His pride filled the room like perfume, thick and nauseating. I joined in the applause, not because I felt proud, but because it was expected. As Chloe shook hands with the dean, she caught my eye again. That smirk returned, this time colder. There was no warmth, no recognition. Just a silent message. You're beneath me. I didn't look away. I didn't blink. I just smiled back, because I knew something she didn't. She believed she had conquered the world on her own. She had no idea she was standing on the shoulders of the very woman she was mocking. The reception hall gleamed with chandeliers, champagne, and ambition. Waiters in crisp uniforms carried trays of hors d'oeuvres no one touched but everyone admired. Laughter, polished and performative, echoed across the room like background music in a play that none of us had auditioned for. I lingered near the back, clutching the now wrinkled gift bag, feeling like a shadow in a room full of stars. Chloe, glowing and confident, was surrounded by admirers, classmates, professors, extended family we hadn't spoken to in years. My father had made himself the unofficial ambassador of her success, introducing himself to strangers with a puffed chest and phrases like, "My daughter the MBA graduate," or "She's headed to a Fortune 500 internship next month." No one mentioned me. No one even asked. Then the microphone squealed slightly, pulling attention to the stage where Dean Mays stood. We'd now like to invite one of our distinguished graduates to share a few words about her journey and what this accomplishment means to her, he announced. Chloe's hand shot up, of course. Always the performer, always the spotlight. She took the stage with the grace of a pageant queen, her cream-coloured dress shimmering beneath the lights. "Thank you, Dean Mays," she began, her voice smooth and rehearsed. "This journey has been transformative. I'm endlessly grateful to the faculty, my peers, and of course my family, for believing in me." Polite applause followed. I nodded slightly. So far, so standard. "But I also want to talk about contrast," she continued, adjusting the mic, "because contrast makes success clearer. Take my sister, for example, Maggie." Heads turned slightly towards me, just subtle enough to be humiliating. She's been working as a waitress since she was, 20? 40 now and still going strong. She once told me her biggest tip was $20. I guess ambition doesn't run in all branches of the family tree. The room paused. Half-choked laughter bubbled up like champagne foam. Some tried to suppress it. Others didn't bother. My father's chuckle broke the silence entirely. "One successful daughter's enough," he said, loud enough for those near him to hear. He lifted his glass towards the stage as if to say, "Cheers to evolution." The humiliation sank like ice water through my spine. I could feel my cheeks burning, but I didn't move. I didn't blink. I sat there like a statue, cold and composed, while every eye in the room took a quick inventory of my thrift store dress and scuffed flats. This wasn't the first time Chloe had used me for contrast, but it was the first time she'd done it on a stage, into a microphone, with applause waiting in the wings. She continued, voice syrupy sweet. "Still, I believe everyone plays their part. Some people inspire us by rising above. Others remind us where we could have ended up." The insults slid down the room like oil on marble, too slippery to confront, too thick to ignore. I watched my father beam, entirely unbothered by the public takedown of his eldest daughter. He clapped like she'd just recited Shakespeare. "That's my girl," he muttered again, pride dripping from every word. I smiled, not out of forgiveness or grace, but because I already knew something they didn't. This wasn't Chloe's moment of triumph, it was the beginning of her reckoning. As the last syllable of Chloe's smug conclusion echoed across the reception hall, a fresh wave of laughter followed. Controlled, sharp, measured like the applause you give a stand-up comic after a particularly cruel joke. I sat perfectly still, the muscles in my back tense but unmoving. No tears came. I didn't blink. I didn't swallow. Instead, I quietly reached into my handbag and tapped the voice recorder app on my phone. The tiny red dot glowed on screen, indicating it had been recording for the last 20 minutes, long enough to capture every word of Chloe's speech, my father's commentary, and the laughter from the crowd. I hadn't planned to record anything, not consciously, but something in me, earlier that day, had whispered, "Save this. This will matter later." I slipped the phone back into my bag and smoothed my dress, the way someone might adjust a tablecloth before a grand reveal. The gift bag with the silver pen rested on my lap, now almost laughable in its symbolism, a gesture of honour given to someone who clearly saw me as an embarrassment. Across the room, a woman leaned over to her husband. "Did she just call out her sister like that? In public," she whispered. Her tone wasn't disapproving, it was entertained. That stung more than Chloe's words. I was used to being dismissed by family, but strangers? The difference today was simple. This wasn't sadness I felt, it was clarity. Tomorrow, the illusion they'd built, the idea of Chloe as a self-made star and me as the family cautionary tale, would shatter. They didn't know I had a seat on the university's donor advisory board. They didn't know I had co-authored the scholarship initiative that funded Chloe's tuition. They didn't know I had built the financial scaffolding that kept this school upright. And they certainly didn't know I had reviewed Chloe's application personally, with her embellished tales of hardship and resilience that made no mention of me. I wasn't planning revenge. I didn't want applause, pity, or even an apology. But I wanted this moment documented, not for them, but for me. The final unfiltered proof of how easily they erased my sacrifices, how eagerly they laughed at my expense. I wanted a time-stamped, unedited memory of the moment my own blood chose public humiliation over familial loyalty. That way, when the truth came out, I wouldn't have to explain a thing. I'd simply press play. A young man passed by, offering a tray of wine. I took a glass, my fingers steady. Behind the stem, I saw Chloe step off the stage, accepting compliments, soaking in admiration. Someone touched her shoulder and said, "Brave speech, Chloe, so authentic." Authentic. The word nearly made me laugh. She walked in my shadow for years, funded by me, protected by me, unknowingly propped up by the very hands she now slapped away with her words. And yet they called her authentic. Fine. They could keep their illusions for one more night. I raised my glass slightly in Chloe's direction. She caught my eye, surprised I was still there. Her expression faltered just for a second before snapping back into place. And I smiled, not out of kindness, but calm anticipation. Tomorrow, when Dean Mays stood behind the podium to announce the Foundation's benefactor, their faces would change. Not because I'd finally be seen, but because they'd realise they never truly saw me at all. Tonight I was the joke. Tomorrow I'd be the truth. The rain had started sometime during the reception, soft and steady. By the time I reached the parking lot, it had turned into a quiet drizzle that painted the pavement in shimmering reflections. I didn't rush. Let them toast and gossip and relive Chloe's punchlines. I had somewhere else to be. My hands trembled only slightly as I gripped the steering wheel of my old Honda. Not from nerves, but from restraint. The kind you build over decades of being talked over, dismissed and overlooked. The kind of strength that doesn't need to scream. Instead of heading straight home, I turned left at the light towards the old cemetery just beyond the town limits. It was nearly empty when I arrived, the iron gates creaking slightly as I pushed them open. I knew exactly where to go. Past the old oak, third row from the back, second stone on the left. I knelt in front of the granite marker, brushing away a few damp leaves. The name carved into the stone brought both ache and warmth. David Lowell. Beloved husband, brilliant soul, 1976-2016. "Hi," I whispered, setting the gift bag down beside the stone. "You wouldn't believe the circus I just walked out of." The wind rustled lightly through the trees, almost like a breath in response. I sat in silence for a moment, then let the words come. She did it again, made a show of herself, and me. I leaned back, exhaling hard. But this time was different. I didn't cry, I didn't even flinch. You'd be proud of that. David had been the only person who saw me, not just the sister, not the waitress, but the woman who thought deeply, planned carefully, and never forgot a promise. When he died, crushed in a scaffolding collapse at the steel plant, I thought I'd collapse too. But he had always planned for the unthinkable. The settlement, life insurance, and his meticulous savings amounted to just over $2.1 million. Enough, people assumed, to buy a better life, maybe a condo, a new car, a vacation from grief. Instead, I bought a crumbling empire. The university Chloe now stood, proudly graduated from, had been on the verge of collapse 4 years ago. Declining enrolment, discredited faculty, and a debt load so heavy the board was considering bankruptcy. I'd attended one of their public town hall meetings, sitting quietly in the back, just observing. What I saw was potential. Untapped, mismanaged, but still alive. Over the course of 6 months, I made my move. With David's funds, I quietly established the Sparrow Foundation, named after his favourite bird, one he used to say, sings even in storms. The foundation acquired a controlling interest in the university's debt. It didn't make headlines. Most donors preferred plaques. I preferred silence. From there, I worked closely with the university's board, first as a silent advisor, then as an active strategist. We overhauled programs, restructured faculty contracts, rebuilt the financial aid department from the ground up. When the board offered me a seat, I declined. I wanted to watch, not from above, but from behind. Chloe applied during year 2 of the new scholarship program. Her grades were decent, her resume polished, and her essay embellished. It told of growing up in a modest home, raised by a hard-working single father after family hardships, forced her sister to make different choices. Not wrong. but definitely not the whole truth. Still, I stamped the approval, not out of guilt, but to see what she'd do with it. And here we were. She still doesn't know, I murmured to David. None of them do, but tomorrow they will. I stood, brushing the dirt from my skirt. I didn't use your money for revenge. I used it to build something. For them, for others, for you. The clouds thinned above, and a sliver of light broke through. Just for a second. I smiled. Thanks for believing in me when no one else did. Back in the quiet of my apartment, I made myself a cup of tea and settled at the small desk that doubled as my workspace. A pile of documents waited: scholarship evaluations, foundation budget reports, email summaries from the university's provost. I lit a candle, not for mood, but out of habit. David used to say it helped me shift modes. From diner waitress to something far more strategic. It had taken 3 years to rebuild the school, but the transformation was undeniable. Enrolment had increased 46% since the Sparrow Foundation began its funding initiatives. The curriculum was stronger. Faculty evaluations had improved. We'd brought in visiting scholars from institutions like Northwestern and Berkeley, people who would have laughed at our old campus 4 years ago. I wasn't a face on a brochure. I didn't want to be. I sat quietly in the background, guiding decisions, approving budgets, suggesting talent to recruit. I reviewed every scholarship application personally, including the one that had made me pause, with both disbelief and a strange flicker of curiosity. Chloe Marie Lowell. Her file came through a week before deadline. Her GPA was solid but not extraordinary. Her work history was minimal. What stood out, if you could call it that, was her essay. It opened with a quote from a best-selling self-help book and spiralled into a vaguely inspiring narrative about resilience, family hardship and personal ambition. She mentioned her father's strength, her own tenacity, and a sister who sacrificed her dreams, though she never said my name, not once. Still, I remembered pausing at that sentence. She sees it, even if she won't say it. Her story was half truth, half fiction. The parts that glorified her, fluffed. The parts that made me invisible, left in shadows. I could have rejected her. Plenty of applicants were stronger, academically, financially, emotionally. But I was curious. I wanted to see what she'd become when placed in a system I helped build, when stripped of her entitlement and surrounded by students with real struggle in their bones. So I approved it, stamped, signed, authorised by the anonymous director of the Sparrow Foundation, me. I didn't do it out of kindness. It wasn't charity. It was an experiment. Would she rise? Would she grow? Or would she cling to the illusion of superiority, oblivious to the hands that held her up? Over time, the answer became clear. Chloe had coasted, leveraged her charm, surrounded herself with flatterers. She aced group projects but rarely led them. She talked more than she listened. She never once asked who ran the scholarship committee or thanked the foundation in any public forum. The irony? She became the perfect case study for everything we were trying to dismantle, and I let her. One Friday evening, during a closed-door strategy session with Dean Mays, he leaned back in his chair, studying me over the rim of his glasses. "You ever think of taking a more visible role?" he asked. "People like you, strategic, long-game thinkers, you're rare in this sector." I shook my head. Visibility muddies purpose. I work better in the background. He tapped a folder labelled Sparrow Metrics. Year 3. "You've done more for this institution than any 10 administrators combined," he said. "You're the brain behind the curtain." I smiled at that. "Good. That's where I like to be." He raised an eyebrow. "And Chloe? Still no clue?" "None," I replied, "and I prefer it that way." "Why?" he asked. I looked out the window at the quad below, where students were gathering under cafe lights. "Because sometimes the best revenge," I said softly, "is letting them believe they succeeded alone." The morning after Chloe's graduation, I was back at the diner by 6:45 a.m, tying my apron and greeting the usual truckers and retirees who rolled in with hollow eyes and loose change. The bell above the door jingled with every entry, and the coffee pot hissed like it resented being awake. But I didn't mind. The routine was grounding. In this place, no one asked about academic credentials or family trees. They just wanted their eggs over medium and their toast not burnt. Double bacon, Maggie, grunted Frank, from booth 3, and none of that low-sodium stuff. You got it, I said, scribbling on my pad like I hadn't just rebuilt an entire university. There was something almost absurd about how easily I moved between worlds. In this one, I was just Maggie, the dependable waitress with the quick hands and decent coffee. No one here suspected that just 12 hours ago, I'd been reviewing faculty salary restructures and negotiating a potential international partnership with a Canadian business school. They didn't know that after closing shift, I'd slip into my car, drive 2 towns over and step into a conference room where I sat with deans and trustees discussing campus expansion and curriculum innovation. They didn't know that I personally reviewed every financial aid appeal, every capital expense request, every major hiring proposal. They didn't know I was the woman behind the Sparrow Foundation, the one responsible for reviving their children's alma mater, and that's exactly how I wanted it. I wasn't playing small, I was playing smart. The less they saw, the more I could build. At noon, I took my 15-minute break, scrolling through my phone while sitting on an overturned milk crate in the alley behind the diner. Among the usual promotional emails and student newsletters, one message caught my eye. Subject: urgent. Loan increase request. It was from Chloe. She was requesting an additional $1,500 in emergency funding to cover post-graduation relocation costs. No hi. No hope you're well. Just a digital plea sent into the void she didn't realise I occupied. The loan application included a short justification letter written in her usual polished tone. Due to unforeseen housing delays, I'm requesting a temporary increase to my existing student support package. I'm confident repayment will begin promptly following the commencement of my employment offer with Thorne and Miles Consulting. I'd heard of them, one of the firms we had courted last year to become internship partners, under a program I designed. I leaned back against the wall, amused. She had no clue I would be the one reading this. No idea that the director she thought was some retired hedge fund ghost was actually the woman she mocked with a microphone the day before. And yet I approved it. Again. I entered the system, clicked through the necessary boxes and authorised the transfer. Not out of kindness, not out of guilt, but because I wanted her to keep walking blindly, arrogantly, until the moment the truth cracked through. This wasn't cruelty. This was precision. When people think you're nothing, they never guard against you. They never suspect you're the one keeping the lights on. Later that night, as I counted my tips and restocked the napkin dispensers, my phone buzzed again. Another message. Subject: thank you. Chloe. Got the funds. Appreciate it. We'll pay you back once I get settled. I stared at the message. Not even a full sentence of gratitude, just transactional efficiency. I locked my phone and slid it into my apron. Fine, let her borrow. Let her rise. Let her believe she did it all herself. Because the higher she climbed on a ladder I built, the more spectacular the fall would be when she finally looked down and saw whose hands had held it steady. The following week, while pouring coffee into chipped mugs and refilling ketchup bottles, I received a call from Dean Mays. I let it go to voicemail. I never answered calls while on shift. The diner, for all its grunge and grease, demanded a different version of me, one that could balance plates and people without letting the two collide. Later that night, once I was back in my apartment and out of my apron, I listened to his message. Hey Maggie, just a heads up, Thorne and Miles Consulting confirmed partnership acceptance today. That makes them our third corporate partner tied to the Sparrow Investment Group this quarter. Nicely played. Also, Chloe's name came up on their incoming analyst list. You knew, didn't you? I smiled. Yes, I knew. What Chloe hadn't realised, and perhaps never would, was that her next job, her golden career kickoff, was only possible because of me. Not just through scholarships or programme redesigns. No, this went deeper. Strategic partnerships. Targeted investments. Long-term ecosystem building. When I created the Sparrow Foundation, I didn't just aim to save a struggling university. I aimed to control the ecosystem that surrounded it. We didn't just fund programmes. We took equity in startups that hired our graduates. We didn't just donate to research. We brokered deals with consulting firms, real estate developers, and regional banks to tie their growth to our student success. Our influence extended beyond campus and into boardrooms and hiring committees. Our name didn't appear on the paperwork, but our money did. Quietly, consistently, powerfully. Chloe's future employer? They'd accepted our funding for their new innovation lab. Our agreement. Preference for applicants from our university, especially scholarship recipients. She got the interview because of a list I curated. She got the job because of a phone call I made, and still she didn't know. She sent me another message that afternoon. Starting at Thorn next month, nervous but excited. Thanks again for the help. She thought she was thanking some faceless administrator, some bureaucrat paid to push papers and approve loans. It never occurred to her she was texting her own sister, the woman she'd mocked, pitied and erased in front of hundreds. It would have been easy to reveal it then, to say, I'm the one funding your future, to pull back the curtain and bask in her confusion. But I waited, because timing was everything. Chloe thought she lived in a world she'd earned. In reality, she moved through corridors I had built, protected by policies I had shaped, and welcomed into rooms I had unlocked. She didn't just walk through doors, I'd held them open from behind the scenes. And she wasn't alone. Over 300 students had benefited from the Sparrow ecosystem. Many came from families like mine, working class, overlooked, expected to settle for less. Through my silent involvement, they gained access to internships, mentorships, and graduate placements they'd never dreamed of. Some of them wrote letters of gratitude. Chloe never did, and still I let her walk forward, because this was never about proving myself to her. This was about building something bigger than either of us. But that didn't mean I wasn't prepared, because the moment was coming, the twist she would never see, the unveiling that would tilt the axis of her world, if only for a moment, just enough for her to finally understand what she'd stood on all along. And I wouldn't have to say a word. The rain came back the next morning, steady, deliberate, like the sky knew what kind of day it was. I stood in front of my modest closet, running a hand over the navy blue suit I had worn only twice before. Once at David's funeral and once at my first meeting with the university's board of trustees. Today it would serve a third purpose. The donor recognition ceremony was held in the university's grand ballroom, a space that rarely saw students and often housed only the echoes of influence. A velvet rope cordoned off the press, and linen-covered tables were adorned with programmes and polished silverware. Every seat bore a name tag, and at the front, centred beneath a large projection screen, was a single name: Sparrow Foundation, Primary Benefactor. Chloe and my father arrived 10 minutes before the programme began. I saw them from across the room, her heels clicking confidently, his shoulders square with pride. Neither of them saw me. They took their seats at the table reserved for familial guests of the honoree, a detail carefully planted by Dean Mays to ensure they'd be front and centre. I remained near the back, eyes scanning the crowd as trustees, partners and university staff filed in. Whispers floated through the room about who the mysterious benefactor might be. The Sparrow Foundation had operated anonymously since its creation, with no photos, no press releases and no public statements. All that was about to change. Dean Mays took the stage precisely at 10 o'clock. His voice, firm and clear, carried through the ballroom like a bowstring drawn back. Ladies and gentlemen, faculty and friends, he began. We are gathered here today not just to celebrate our students, but to recognise the single most impactful transformation this institution has ever experienced. Chloe adjusted her seat, flipping open the programme. Her brow furrowed at the blank page where a name should have been. For the past 4 years, Dean Mays continued, this university has undergone a quiet revolution. Scholarships, facility upgrades, curriculum overhauls, and corporate partnerships have reshaped our identity. My father leaned in slightly, whispering something to Chloe. She shook her head, clearly unsure what to expect. This change, Mays said, pausing for effect, has not come from public grants or government subsidies. It has come from a single source, a single visionary. The room leaned forward. The Sparrow Foundation has contributed over $3 million in direct support. It has influenced every strategic decision we've made since 2018, and until today, its leadership has chosen to remain anonymous. A wave of whispers followed. Chloe sat straighter in her seat, eyes narrowing. Dean Mays smiled. But today we break that silence. He turned towards the projection screen behind him. With a quiet click of the remote, my face appeared. Professional photo, subtle smile, navy blue suit. Gasps, literal gasps. From across the room, I watched my sister's jaw drop. "Please join me," Mays said, "in recognising the founder, director and sole architect of the Sparrow Foundation, Miss Maggie Lowell." There was no applause at first, just stunned silence. Chairs creaked, a fork clattered against china. Chloe's diploma programme slipped from her hand, landing with a soft thud on the floor. My father turned to her in disbelief, then back towards the screen, eyes blinking as if it were a trick of the light. I walked forward slowly, not for show, not for drama, just because it was time. And for the first time in years, maybe ever, every eye in the room looked at me with something I'd never seen from them before. Recognition. My heels echoed against the polished wood floor with each step I took towards the stage, a hollow, steady rhythm that seemed louder than it should have been in the stunned silence. I didn't rush, I didn't smile, I just walked, one hand by my side, the other holding nothing but the weight of revelation. Dean Mays stepped back slightly, offering the microphone with a gracious hand. He looked at me, eyebrows raised, waiting for a nod of acceptance. I shook my head. The audience gasped, not because I refused the spotlight, but because they expected something more. A speech, an explanation, a justification. They wanted the backstory, the drama, the tale of how the waitress sisters secretly built an empire. But I had no interest in performing. Let them sit with it. Let them choke on their assumptions and stew in the silence. I turned towards the audience. For a moment, I looked only at Chloe. She was frozen in place, her lips parted slightly as if to speak, but no words came out. Her hands trembled in her lap. She looked from me to the projection screen and back again, her face slowly registering something she'd never considered. That the person she'd spent her entire adult life diminishing was the very person who had opened every door she'd ever walked through. And then I looked at my father. He was sitting upright, his pride gone rigid in his spine, his expression a mix of disbelief and something bordering on fear. "Maggie," he breathed, just loud enough for the tables nearby to hear. Why didn't you ever say something?" I held his gaze. For the first time in decades, I didn't look away. "Because," I said simply, "you weren't listening." And with that, I stepped off the stage. No grand exit, no applause, no ceremonial music, just me, walking out through the same side door I had entered, the velvet curtains swaying gently behind me. The audience remained seated, as if afraid that any movement might break the spell. Dean Mays stepped forward again, clearing his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said with careful composure, "we thank Miss Lowell for her transformative vision. There will be refreshments in the West Atrium for those wishing to learn more about our next phase of development." But no one moved, not right away. They were too stunned, too busy recalibrating everything they thought they knew about the invisible sister, the family disappointment, the one who poured coffee while others climbed ladders. Behind me, I heard the sounds of hushed voices, people murmuring, "That's her," and "unbelievable," and "I never would have guessed." A few gasped again when they pieced together that the Sparrow Foundation had not just helped the university, but had saved it. As I reached the lobby, I stopped for a moment and turned back. Through the glass doors, I could see Chloe still seated, unmoving, her hands clenched together as if holding the weight of her own realization. I didn't hate her. I didn't even feel angry anymore. What I felt was clarity. Chloe had built her identity on the belief that she had risen on merit alone. But now, with the scaffolding revealed, the illusion shattered, and not by a cruel act, but by the quiet unveiling of truth. She would remember this moment, not just the embarrassment, but the recalibration of every story she had told herself, about me, about herself, about what it meant to be powerful. For once, the applause was mine to deny. Outside, the rain had softened to a mist, barely clinging to the air as I stepped beneath the awning. I didn't need to run. There was no need to hurry. Everything I had intended to say had already been said, just not with words. In the distance, I heard a voice call out my name. "Maggie!" I turned slowly. It was my father. He jogged towards me, breath short, his face pale. "I didn't know," he said, almost pleading. "I had no idea. Why didn't you tell me? Why would you hide this from your own family?" I looked at him for a long moment. The rain had dampened the shoulders of his coat, made his hair stick to his forehead. He looked smaller now somehow. "You didn't want to know," I said quietly. "You chose what you wanted to see." I was wrong," he whispered. You thought I failed," I said, cutting him off gently, "because I didn't live by your definition of success." "I never meant, but you did," I said, "and that's okay. You were wrong. People can be." He blinked, unsure what to say next. I didn't wait. I turned and walked towards the car, the click of my heels now echoing louder than before, not because the room was quiet, but because I no longer cared how I sounded. They had seen me. Not the version they wanted, not the shadow, but the architect, the storm, and that was all I needed. 2 days after the donor ceremony, I found myself sitting across from Dean Mays in his office, the morning sun bleeding through the tall windows behind him. The room was quiet, lined with shelves of thick books and framed photographs of former graduates, smiling faces frozen in moments of triumph. I wondered if Chloe's would join them someday. "I wasn't sure if you'd come today," Dean Mays said, sipping from a mug that read, "World's Most Underpaid Dean." His tone was calm, but his eyes were sharp, like a man who knew something big was about to shift. "I always keep my appointments," I replied, placing a thin leather folder on the desk between us. He glanced down at it, then back at me. "What is it?" "The final transition paperwork," I said. "I'd like to move Chloe's remaining student debt from the Sparrow Foundation to Lowell Financial." He blinked. "All of it?" "All 90,000, I said, folding my hands, "effective immediately." He didn't respond at first, just stared at me, fingers drumming softly against the desk. Finally he asked, "Are you sure about this? You know what that means." "I do." "She's going to find out." "I know." There was no bitterness in my voice, no triumph, just certainty. "She won't understand it," he said after a moment. "She'll think it's revenge." "She can think whatever she wants," I replied, "but this is about responsibility. That money wasn't a gift. It was an investment in her future, and investments come with terms." Dean May studied me for a long while before leaning back in his chair. "You're not who I thought you were when we first met." "Good," I said. "That means I did it right." By the end of the meeting, the transfer had been finalised. Chloe's loan would now be managed by Lowell Financial, a wholly owned subsidiary I had quietly established under my legal name last year, designed for one purpose: accountability. For the first time in her life, Chloe would have to write a cheque with my name at the top. I left the office with a strange sense of completion. Not satisfaction exactly, just closure. 3 days later, the first notice went out, certified mail and email as policy dictated. It was worded professionally. "Dear Miss Chloe Lowell, this letter serves as notification of the reassignment of your outstanding educational debt effective immediately. Your new lender of record is Lowell Financial Group. The full balance of $90,000 is now under their servicing and repayment policies. Your first instalment is due within 30 days. For assistance or to discuss payment options, contact your dedicated account liaison, Maggie Lowell." I imagined her face when she read that last line. The phone call came less than 20 minutes later. I let it go to voicemail. Then came a text. "What is this? Why are you listed? Is this some kind of mistake?" It wasn't. It never was. The following afternoon she emailed, "This has to be a misunderstanding. The scholarship covered everything. I was told the debt was forgiven." I replied, short and formal, "Your loan was partially subsidised by the foundation. The remainder was structured as income deferred, now reassigned under standard repayment. Please refer to the terms in your original acceptance letter," which she hadn't read. Because people like Chloe don't read the fine print when they think they're entitled to the whole document. A week passed, 3 more messages, 2 from Chloe, 1 from my father. "Maggie," he wrote, "Chloe's very upset. She says she's being targeted. Can't you help?" No, not anymore, because helping her had always meant shielding her from reality. And I was done doing that. The following Monday, Chloe arrived unannounced at the diner. I saw her through the window, still polished, still perfect, but different now. Rattled. She waited until my shift slowed before approaching the counter. "Maggie, we need to talk," she said, her voice lower than usual. I kept wiping the same section of the counter, not looking up. "You can email the finance department. Everything's in writing." "I don't want some auto reply," she snapped. "I want you to explain why you're doing this." I met her gaze, finally, calm and unblinking. "It's not personal, it's a contract. You think this is fair, that I owe you 90 grand because of some paperwork trick?" I let out a quiet laugh. "A trick? Chloe, you signed it. You took the money. You enjoyed the privileges. Now you pay for them. That's how adulthood works." She looked like she wanted to scream, but didn't. "You're doing this to punish me." "No," I said. "I'm doing this to remind you that actions have consequences, that opportunities cost something, and that people don't owe you their silence." Her mouth opened, then closed again. Behind her, a family entered the diner laughing. She stepped aside to let them pass, but her eyes stayed locked on mine. "You were supposed to help me." "I did," I said softly, "more than you'll ever understand." She didn't respond. She turned and walked out without another word. I didn't follow. I went back to my tables, filled coffee mugs, and took orders, the smell of frying bacon hanging in the air like it always did. But something had shifted. Not in her, in me. For the first time, I felt no guilt in holding someone accountable, not because I wanted revenge, but because I finally believed I had the right to. 3 days passed before I saw her again. It was the dinner rush, and the diner was packed. The smell of grease and onions lingered in the air, and the bell above the door jingled every 30 seconds. I was balancing 3 plates of meatloaf when I spotted her, Chloe, standing in the corner like a storm cloud no one had forecasted. She was dressed in beige slacks and a silk blouse, her hair pulled into a tight bun that looked less polished than usual. Her eyes scanned the room, and when they found mine, I saw something I hadn't before. She wasn't angry. She was scared. I didn't stop working, didn't wave. I returned to the kitchen window, passed out orders, refilled ketchup bottles, and gave customers their checks. Let her wait. Let her sit in the place I'd sat all my life, on the outside, watching everyone else get served first. Eventually, when the crowd thinned and the lights dimmed to their end-of-day amber, she approached the counter. "Do you have a minute?" she asked, her voice lower than usual. I gestured to the empty stool at the far end. 5. She slid onto the vinyl cushion like it burned. Her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her blouse. She looked exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept, not from physical strain, but from the weight of realising their world wasn't as solid as they thought. "You're really doing this?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the hum of the soda machine. "You're going to make me pay it all back?" I didn't look at her. I was organising sugar packets. "It's not about punishment," she snorted. "Feels like it." "It's about responsibility," I said, finally meeting her eyes. "You took the money, you accepted the scholarship, you used the emergency funding, you leveraged the network I built to land your dream job, and not once did you stop to ask where any of it came from." "I didn't know it was you," she whispered. "I know," I said. "That's the point." She looked down, then back at me. "But why now? Why not just let it go? It's not like I can't pay it eventually." "You will," I said, "because that's what adults do. They pay their debts, especially to people they've disrespected." Silence stretched between us. "You're trying to ruin me," she said finally, her voice trembling. "You stood there, silent, while I made a fool of myself in front of everyone. You let me mock you, laugh at you. I didn't deny it. You let Dad believe you were a failure." "I was never trying to prove anything to either of you," I said. "But if I had stood up and shouted the truth that day, you would have rolled your eyes, called it petty, claimed I was hijacking your moment. You would have missed the lesson." "What lesson?" "That you've never earned anything alone," I said. That the version of success you wear like perfume was bought with someone else's sacrifice. You just never bothered to ask who paid the price. She looked away, her jaw clenched tight. I didn't ask for your help. No, I said, but you took it, and now you'll repay it. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't heavy with resentment. It was raw, open. I didn't mean what I said at the graduation, she said quietly. The joke about you, it was stupid. Yes, I replied, it was. She swallowed hard. I was nervous. I always try to be funny when I feel like I don't belong. And then it just came out. That wasn't the first time, Chloe, I said, voice steady. You've made me the punchline for years. I just stopped laughing. She wiped her palms on her pants. I thought you hated me. I don't hate you, I said, but I needed you to see me. Her eyes filled, and for the first time in over a decade, she didn't hide it. Okay, she said, breath catching. I'll pay it. I blinked. What? The debt, she repeated. I'll pay every cent. I won't ask for forgiveness. I won't fight the interest rate. I'll pay it. Not because you're forcing me, but because I should have known better. I stared at her. For the first time, she looked like the girl I used to know. The one who cried when I left for my first job. The one who used to sit at the kitchen table and ask me what kind of woman she should grow up to be. I didn't realise how much I took from you, she said softly. Not just the money, the story, the space, the air. You disappeared so I could shine, and I never even noticed. I said nothing. What could I say to that? She stood slowly. I'll set up auto-pay. You'll get it every month, on time. Thank you, I said. She paused, then added, I'm not doing this for you, I'm doing it for me. And with that, she turned and left. I watched her go, the bell above the door jingling behind her. It wasn't redemption, not yet. But it was a beginning. The 4th of July barbecue had always been a tradition in the Lowell family. Patio chairs in uneven rows, a cooler full of sodas and cheap beer, and paper plates that folded under the weight of ribs and coleslaw. But this year, something felt different. Maybe it was the way people paused when I arrived, or how conversations dipped just slightly in volume. I'd brought a simple pasta salad, placed it quietly on the table, and joined a folding chair in the back without fanfare. No one called me the waitress this year. No one asked if I needed a better job. Even the jokes, the light-hearted barbs that usually flew like bottle rockets, were noticeably absent. Instead there was space and silence. Not cold, but tentative, like a room that had been repainted but still smelled faintly of the old colour. Dad stood at the grill, flipping burgers like nothing had changed, but he kept glancing my way. It wasn't the usual flicker of indifference. It was something heavier, measured, as if he wanted to speak but hadn't figured out how. I was seated between Aunt Lorraine and Uncle Frank, the latter of whom leaned towards me midway through his second plate and said, So this foundation thing, that's really something, huh? I smiled, just trying to do some good. He nodded slowly. Well, you've done more than that. Chloe told us a little. It's impressive. A pause. Real impressive. From across the yard, I caught Chloe's eye. She was sitting quietly next to the picnic table, legs crossed, hands clasped in her lap. She hadn't said much all day. No attention-grabbing stories, no quick quips. She listened more than she spoke. At first, Dad finally approached. He carried 2 plates, one for himself, one for me. He sat in the chair next to mine, wordless at first. Then, as if exhaling something that had been lodged in his chest for years, he spoke. I didn't know, he said. I figured, I replied, not unkindly. He nodded, chewing slowly. All those nights you left early from dinner, I thought. Well, I thought you just didn't like being around us anymore. I had meetings, I said, and spreadsheets, and staff to hire. He chuckled, but it was hollow. You always were the quiet one. Should have known the quiet ones build empires. We sat in silence for a while. I wasn't fair to you, he said. I was proud of Chloe because she made sense to me. She followed a path I recognised, grades, internships, titles. And I didn't, I said. He nodded again. But that doesn't mean I wasn't wrong. I turned to look at him. His hands, always firm and calloused, were now fidgeting with a plastic fork. I don't need an apology, I said, but I won't pretend it didn't hurt. I know, he said softly. I just hope... maybe it's not too late to see things differently. That was enough. Not a full redemption. But the door, once closed, was now ajar. From behind us, someone started passing around dessert, store-bought cupcakes and fruit salad in a plastic bowl. Conversation picked up again, but there was a new texture to it, less performance, more presence. Chloe eventually walked over, standing at the edge of the group like someone not sure they were invited. "You want a seat?" I asked, gesturing beside me. She nodded, sitting down wordlessly. She didn't speak, she didn't need to. For the first time we were part of the same story, not competitors, not contrasts, but something closer to equals. Maybe not sisters in the way we used to be, but something better, starting over. The evening wore on, and the backyard settled into the golden lull that always came just before dusk. The kids were chasing fireflies, the adults had loosened their belts, and the music playing from someone's old Bluetooth speaker drifted lazily through the summer air. Chloe sat next to me, still quiet. It was a different kind of silence than the one we used to share, the bitter kind, full of old resentments and unspoken comparisons. This one felt heavier, but not sharp, like the beginning of an apology, still searching for the right words. She finally broke it. "I've started making payments," she said. "The first went through yesterday." I nodded. "I saw it." She hesitated. "I'm going to pay it all, Maggie, every cent, and I'm going to start over, properly this time. No pretending, no skipping steps." "Good," I said, turning towards her. "You should." She looked at me, eyes clear and steady. "I've been thinking about everything you built, about how many people you helped without ever asking for credit, and I realised that's the kind of work I want to do. Not just high-profile consulting gigs. I want to build something that matters." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I reached under my seat and pulled out a slim envelope. It was cream-coloured, thick, unmarked. I handed it to her. "What's this?" she asked. "Read it later," I said. "It's a proposal, a new expansion programme I'm developing for the Sparrow Foundation. We're adding a mentorship initiative for young women from underrepresented backgrounds. We need someone to manage it, someone who knows what it means to benefit from a second chance and wants to offer it to others." Her fingers tightened around the envelope. "Are you serious?" "I wouldn't have given it to you if I wasn't." Her voice caught a little. "But after everything I said, after the way I treated you, why would you trust me with this?" "Because," I said gently, "you finally see what I was trying to teach you all along, that power is nothing without purpose, and that the best way to pay back a debt is to build something with it." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. "I'll prove I can do it," she whispered. "I know you will," I replied. Across the yard, our father was helping Uncle Frank light the first batch of sparklers. Laughter burst from the kids as they waved glowing trails in the air, spinning until they collapsed onto the grass in dizzy heaps. Someone opened another cooler. Someone else passed around watermelon slices. The world kept turning, but for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't sitting on the fringe. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Later, after hugs and soft goodbyes, I climbed into my car and turned the key. The engine hummed like it always did, a little too loud, a little too proud. But tonight it didn't sound tired, it sounded like it still had roads to travel. I pulled onto the main road as the sun dipped below the trees, casting long shadows that stretched like memories across the pavement. The sky bled orange and pink, like someone had spilled fire across the horizon. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt it. Not vindication, not victory, just peace. Because I wasn't waiting to be seen anymore. I had been seen, and I was still here.